Hi there my friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm working Derwent Inktense on a piece of cold press watercolour paper. It's £140 in weight. I haven't pre-stretched it, I've just taped it down to a board, popped a little sketch on there and off we go. So at the moment I'm working with the Inktense pans. Derwent did send me these pans to have a play with and maybe do a review later on, so I didn't pay for these or the Inktense pencils that you'll see later on in the video. I am a Derwent ambassador, so they do send me products as they arrive. Okay, so in each little area at the moment I'm adding water and then I'm just dropping in some pigment, so that's the wet in wet technique. The best thing about the Inktense products is that they are permanent when dry. It does mean that they're a little harder to lift. If you put something down and you don't want it to be there, you've pretty much got to go in straight the way and lift it back out, because once it's dry, it's there for good. But on the plus side, that does mean you can layer and layer and layer, lots of layers, lots of glazing can be used, glazing techniques where you're tinting the colour below. So they really are fun to work with, and it's a nice fast medium to work with too. I could have done this painted just as easily with watercolour, because the same techniques and the same methods do apply to both. And as you can see, I've popped the finished painting up in the top left hand corner there for you to see where I was aiming for. I had a reference image for the robin, and that's about it really. So making it up as I was going along, which is fun. This was just a fun piece. I just sat down, just wanted to play, wanted to relax. I'm sure you all know what that feels like when you get your art products out and no pressure, just put a podcast on or YouTube or the radio or something like that, or some music in the background and just have a play. It's so relaxing. So there you go, building up the pigment. So just using limited colour palette at the moment for the background, because I want this to be all about the bird and obviously the lantern and less about the background. Just to let you know that as you can see me go through the background, creating a background, I dried it off with a hairdryer and then I did it 2 more times. So the background was put in 3 times in all. I haven't shown all of that in this video because it's just a rinse and repeat. It's just the same thing, and it's just to build up that intensity. Sorry, but I'm going behind the reference image there, but it's just the same. Adding water first, then adding pigment on top, dropping the pigment in and letting the pigment just do its own thing, pretty much how you would if you were using watercolours. So these Inktense pans and pencils that you'll see later on, they are light fast in their dry form, but once you add water, the light fast, it's a bit iffy then. They probably are light fast, but I wouldn't go as far to say I'm definitely sure that they are, because as far as I'm aware, Derwent have the same sort of thought ideas as well. Who knows how much water someone's going to add to these pigments, and that might alter how light fast they're going to be in years to come. But I must admit, the paintings that I have done with the Inktense, and they're hanging in the house and they've been sold to clients who have kept me informed, none of them have faded. So not sure. So keep an open mind about the light fastness of the Inktense pigments once water's added. But they are matte when they dry, which is great if you want to photograph your work and then make prints or cards and things like that. So you could make your money back by producing things like that if you don't want to sell your original artworks because of the light fast issues. Well, I shouldn't say issues, but the light fast question mark. Okay, so moving on, I want to keep it quite light around the lantern itself, so I'm making the washes lighter in tone, so more water, less pigment. Just going quite steadily around the bird and around the lamp, because as I said, if you get this pigment anywhere, it's pretty much there to stay. And the last thing I want are purples going across anything where I don't want them to be. I hope everyone's keeping well. It's just a week till Christmas now, Christmas 2023. I hope everybody's gearing up for a relaxing festive time. If you celebrate Christmas, I hope you're getting some time off work and are able to see family and friends. And keep safe, everybody, and I hope you all have a wonderful time. And I hope I've timed this right, so it might give you an idea of painting a little Christmas card for somebody or something like that. You've still got time, you've got a week, there's always time for art. So just playing with those pigments there, and there you can see I've added one whole background coat. Now I'm just going in, adding water to the side of the lamp, adding a little bit of yellow, keeping in mind where because the light is going to be coming from that lamp, and I don't want to get too dark. And there you go. So that was 3 layers. So that background was completed in three layers. And if you can see to the left hand side of the lamp, there is a little bit of a hard line there. When you're working with Inktense, hard line between the yellow and the purple above it, a little bit of a hard line. When you're working with Inktense, excuse me, because it is a stain, they are staining colours, they stain your paper, that's why they won't lift. Hard lines, you've got to work quick to avoid. Okay, so you've got to work quickly to avoid hard lines, and I didn't quite catch that area quick enough, but it's fine. It all sort of blends in and looks okay in the finished painting. And this was just a play piece, and I just happened to have the camcorder running, so hey ho, nothing lost there. And I could have gone on with more layers of yellows using the stronger pigments and covered up that hard line, but to be quite honest, you know, it's a little tiny painting, just a play piece, experimental piece, I guess. And I'm happy with the outcome, so that's all that matters. So using 3 of the Inktense pencils now, and working wet into wet. Just adding a bit of pigment, just want to get that white paper covered up to begin with in the initial layers. Going in with I think that's a number 6 Rosemary and Co brush. One of my favourite watercolour brushes, the Rosemary and Co. And this is, I can't remember which series it is, I'll pop it in the description below, but it's my favourite watercolour brush. Comes out for gouache, comes out for watercolour, and obviously comes out for Inktense. You can use all of your watercolour brushes for Inktense, but if you've got brushes that are, say, a white bristle, and you want to keep them looking pristine, don't use them with Inktense, because the Inktense will stain the hairs and bristles of your brushes. Just a little warning then, if you're precious about your pristine looking brushes, which I'm not. They're there to do a job, they're a tool. Okay. And as you'll see during the painting, I move that board around constantly. For those who've known me for a long time, you'll know that I had rotator cuff muscle problems in my shoulder, and so I make life easy for myself now, and I rotate my work as needed, so I'm always in a comfortable position. I'm actually working flat doing this painting. I do lift the board up at an angle later on in the painting when I'm working on the robin, you'll see that. That's just to make sure the paint is moving in the direction I want it to move. But for the most part, for this piece, I just work flat. Other times I'll be working standing up at an easel, so it's either one or the other. But for this, I needed the washes to go on flat, so I wanted the board flat. Simple as that. So as you can see, you need, with the pencils, you need such a tiny amount of pigment scribbling off onto something rough. This is a textured palette by Caran d'Ache, and it's because of the texture of it, it's ideal for scribbling on some pigment and then adding water and lifting it off with a brush. Or you can you could get a normal plastic palette and go over it with a piece of rough sandpaper, rinse it off under the tap, and then you'll have that rough texture on a piece of plastic to do the same technique as this. But if you do make any rough marks on a plastic palette, just be aware that it will stain from there on. The colours will penetrate the plastic and stain it, but that doesn't worry me either. Oh, look at my weird reflection in the metal part. Ooh, it's like one of those magic mirrors at the fair. Okay, so moving on, adding a little bit of yellow. Nice light washes now. So anywhere where I want the light to be radiating from that lantern, I need to go on very lightly with the colours. So I go on with a little bit of yellow, and while it's still wet, dab off in the middle. That's what I did with the two metal bits running down the front of the lantern. I went over them with a very light wash and then lifted off some of the pigment with a tissue, just retaining that luminosity right in the middle of the lantern itself. Now I've used a couple of other pencils, an orange and a darker yellow, doing exactly the same thing, but now I'll keep that pigment just to the top and bottom of the lantern window. So top, bottom, add a little bit of water. Oh, now I'm going in with a little bit more pigment. But I don't want it right in that middle, so straight in with the tissue, and there you go. And then rinse and repeat in the other two little windows, and just keep dabbing the middle section just to maintain the lighter pigment in the middle. There you go. It's really, really simple. And when I started this painting, I didn't know how I was going to approach the lantern. So it's just one of those things you figure out as you go along. And every painting is different. I've been painting since I was sort of 4, and I'm 57 now. And it's a continuous learning curve. And that's what makes it fun. So leaving the lantern alone for now, letting all of that. Oh no, I'm going in with the darks. I thought I was going into the robin then. Oh. Okay, so adding the same again. So this is the same technique I used to apply the yellow. Just going in with a little bit of pigment. I'm assuming I'll go top and bottom, and then lifting it out in the middle if it goes too far down. And by using quite a bit of water, they're lifting the board there so that the pigments flow in the correct direction. So it is quite controllable. As I said, you could do exactly the same thing just using watercolour. And what you're not seeing is between each layer, I am drying this off completely with a hairdryer, just to make sure that when I go on top with anything else, everything underneath is dry. So just drag that orange pigment down over the two metal pieces of the lantern, just to create a warmth in the metal. It's really simple. And always keeping a piece of tissue in one hand when I'm working with watercolours or Inktense or even acrylics. There you go. And that's why. Okay, so we're going over to the fir tree, the spruce. I'm assuming it's some species of spruce. And going in just with the dark branches. Keeping everything light, because I can always go darker. It's a little bit more trickier to go lighter though with Inktense, unless you want to start going into mixed media, like you could add gouache on top of this, or you could add coloured pencil on top of this, but keeping everything light layers and building up. And then if you do make a mistake and you've only gone in lightly, it would be easier to disguise. The snow falling that you can see on the finished painting, that was just done right at the end, which you'll see, that is in the video, and that's just the splatter technique using a little bit of white gouache and drying off with a hairdryer as well, and it works really well with the Inktense as an underpainting. But as I said, all of this could have been achieved just as easily with watercolour. So got some of the branches in. I'd obviously got fed up of doing the branches, so I do flip from part to part when I'm painting. I don't stick in one corner and then work my way methodically across a painting. I like it to be an enjoyable activity. It's my job after all, and I'm doing it a lot of the time. I want to be comfortable. I want to be making the most of my time, and I want it to be enjoyable. So I decided to go over and start on some of the fir tree needles. And it's just a case, all I did, had in mind that I would put a lighter colour down, so a lighter green down, and then I'd build up glazes over the top of this to create shadows on the fir tree. And as you're putting glazes on to create shadows, you're also enhancing the colours, the amount of colours where you've already put your initial green. So this is just a guideline really, and everything else will be worked on top of this. Where I want the snow to be really white, I'm actually not going to be applying any paint to that. I'm going to be very careful that I retain the white of the paper. Now you could mask it out, but I mean it's time consuming, and really for this a piece this size, it's really easy to just work around the areas where you don't want any paint. So carrying on, just popping that in with the Rosemary & Co. number 6. Lovely little paintbrush. Got a couple of these ones and they keep their tips so fine. I've got another one, but I've never had to use it, and I've had this brush must be going on for about 6 years, I guess, 6 or 7 years, and I've got the other one just as a backup, just in case. But as I said, not needed to use it yet. I have a little pot near my painting area with all my brushes in, watercolour brushes that I use most often, and then I have a display set at the back of me with other watercolour brushes that I reach for rarely. So I am going to do a studio tour. Now I'm in the new studio and people have been requesting that, so that will be coming hopefully first couple of weeks of the new year, hopefully. And then I'll show you what I have in my studio, how I store things. Yeah, a little nosy round. Just going in, making sure that the needles are, these little leaves are pointing in the right direction for each branch. If you're working off a reference image for this, I wouldn't suggest going needle for needle as long as everything's moving in the right direction. You're never going to have your reference image hanging next to your painting, so just keep that in mind. Excuse me. Yeah, I could have edited all of this out, showed you a little bit, but it gives you a rough idea of how I approach things and leaving gaps. So not doing all of the needles connected to a main stem. I am doing some where they seem to be floating in space, and that is because they're going to be surrounded by snow. So it's just the tip of the leaf poking through. Now I've mixed up a lighter wash, which is, I'm classing it as a glaze because I'm now going over the colours, and it's just tinting whatever is beneath it. So whether that's white paper, it's tinting it. Whether that's the green foliage I've already applied, it's tinting that. And with the foliage, because I've left gaps between the little needles, whatever colour I put on top is going to be tinting the paper between the needles and tinting the needles. So straight away you're getting differences in colour and differences in value. And value is just how light or dark something is, that's all. So going in with a darker value there, because that's going to be in shade. You can see that in the finished painting. That is the robins creating a little shadow there on that one. And going in even darker. So just keep building this up. This is all going wet into wet, so I pre-wet the area first with clean water, make sure your brush is clean, and then just add in the pigments as I go along. And at this point you could add more leaves. You could even, you know, go in with your pencils then once it's dry. You could go in with coloured pencils, you can go on top of this with gouache, anything like that. So wetted the area first, going in with some browns. And this is still the pencils. The rest of the painting, apart from the speckly snow at the end, is just the Inktense pencils. So wetting the area again. Now, got to keep in mind that I want the light of the lantern to be hitting that side of the robin, so making sure I'm going in with light colours and hues there, and going into the reds and the darks towards the left of the bird where it would be more shadowed areas. That's wet on dry now, pulling the pigment down towards the edge of those feathers there, just there, wet on to dry. So I haven't pre-wet that area else, it would just blend straight out, it would feather out. No pun intended with the words feather out. A little bit of shadowing round the back of the head. Again, just keeping my mind where the light is, and I had my head over, I had to get, because it's such a small painting, I had to get right over the top of the painting to apply the eye, but I just went in with blue and very dark brown and left some area for the highlight. So it was nice and easy. Going on with darker tones now, working wet in wet. That's the lovely thing about Inktense, is you can go wet on wet over a dried area with no fear of anything lifting back up, which isn't the case always with watercolours. Sorry about that. Going in darker, you can really build the intensity up on these pigments. Look very, very dull when they're dry. So if you look at the pans or look at the pencils, they all look quite dull. But you add water to them and they are so vibrant. So all of my water-soluble mediums, I always swatch them out because they look so different wet to when they're dry. So I've got a swatch sheet in front of me, and I look at that before choosing my colours. Some of the colours I know because I've used them often, but if it's a colour I'm wanting to mix and I'm not quite sure because I haven't used it before, I'll look at my swatch sheet. And the pans, the Inktense pans, the Inktense blocks and the Inktense pencils are all interchangeable. They're all the same pigment but in a different format, so that you can mix and match them. They're all open stock, which means you can buy them all open, you know, one pencil or one pan or one block. They are a dream to work with. And you can work them on fabrics as well as paper and card. You could work them on cardstock, Bristol board, anything like that. But they really come into their own on watercolour paper. Beautiful. I'm yet to try them on canvas, so that's on my to-do list for the new year. Okay, just drying everything off, making sure it's really bone dry before going on with my next layers. Doesn't take long, just a couple of minutes to dry. And then just adding water there so I can start adding shadows. Using purples, lilacs for the shadows. I'd never suggest using black. Black's very flat, even if you mix it with something else, which I do suggest if you're using it in other parts of your painting, to never use it on its own. But I never use black in a shadowed area. It can look very, very dull and odd. And if you're using black and it happens to butt up to anything yellow, you're very likely to get a dirty green colour, and that's not very nice in any painting at all. So just going on with different pigments, using some yellow so that the feathers are reflecting light from the lamp, and lilacs and purples. And once this layer was dry, I went over it again. I think there was possibly 2 or 3 layers for this part of the body of the bird, just darkening everything off. Keeping it simple. It's just lovely, isn't it, watching the paint do its own thing in a wetted area. I'm that relaxed, I'd even got my elbow leaning on the table to the left. Oh, it's just such a relaxing painting to do. I really enjoyed this one. I don't know if you can see that. I've left a very thin white line running down the right hand side of the bird, and leaving that little bit of paper just peeking through just adds to the feeling of the light hitting the bird. You know, I could have gone in at the end and added that with gouache or a white pencil. I know some people like to use white gel pens, but I'm not that keen on those. I'd rather use paint if possible. Just darkening everything up, creating more shadows. These are the final touches now. You know, you keep standing back. If you're unsure, go away, let your painting dry naturally, make a tea or a coffee or something, and then come back to it with fresh eyes, even if that's the next day, and have a look and see what your painting needs. Now, I've used a little bit of transparent paper to mask out the bird so it's not stuck on the bird. I've just cut round, laid it very gently on top of the bird before I apply some background speckles with a toothbrush. That's watered down gouache in that little pot. Then once I've got enough in the background and I want bigger spots, I go on with a brush because I need some of that snow falling in front of the robin. That's why I've now removed the little piece of masking. And if any of those little droplets hit anywhere where I didn't want them, I could quickly go in with a tissue and lift them up because the pigment underneath is permanent. So just steadying my arm there on my hand so I don't have to move the board around, and just enhancing some of the snowy parts, and that's it, it's done. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I hope you all have a fantastic Christmas. Thank you for supporting me on YouTube this past year and all your lovely comments. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.